France's president remains at odds with Muslim leaders across Europe as his authorities respond to attacks, closing down mosques, shutting rights organizations. What is Emmanuel Macron's issue with Islam? This is Roundtable. And a warm welcome from me, David Foster. President Macron has been a target of protests in Muslim-majority countries across the world. He says he wants to deal with what he calls radical Islam, but has he been actually creating divisions rather than healing them? Another attack in France. Last week, 3 people in the French city of Nice were killed and several were injured in a knife attack described as terrorism. French authorities have said the attacker was a man who'd arrived in Europe from Tunisia only days before. Just before the attack, the French Council of Ministers had dissolved the largest Muslim charity in France, Baraka city. It was the latest action taken following the murder last month of teacher Samuel Paty, who'd shown cartoons of the Prophet Muhammad to his class. The French president had already announced new laws to restrict what he called Islamic separatism. Leaders of more than 20 European Muslim organizations have called on Mr. Macron to reject hatred and divisive language, accusing him of encouraging racism. The question they and many others are asking is whether the French president has a problem simply with extremists or with Islam itself. Well, joining us for this first segment of Roundtable, Idriss Sihamedi, the founder of Muslim charity Baraka City, an organization which was dissolved last week by the French Council of Ministers. Mr. Sihamedi, good to have you on the program. I know you're not under any personal restrictions. Baraka City has been dissolved. What reason were you given for that decision?
We don't know exactly what is the reason. We know that it's not from the justice, but it's not from the court, but it's a political reason. And CCIF and Baraka City was targeted by the French government because it's there behind that a lot of reasons. We can see in France the situation in France is very special for the Muslim community, and to target Baraka City, the biggest organization in France, the French government like to send a message for the Muslim community.
The Interior Minister, Gérald Darmanin, has accused Baraka City and yourself personally of disseminating hateful, discriminatory and violent ideas, of reveling in justifying terrorist acts. What's your response?
It's fake news. Fake news is very clear. Why? Because we was under the big investigations in 2016 since 2019. So they didn't find anything. So now, few months later, they come with a new accusations. So they don't have any proof, anything to prove that. They don't have any evidence. So we'd like to know exactly if they have any evidence. We'd like to debate with them and to discuss about that. But I'd like to be very clear. Baraka City was under investigations 3 years. The French authorities and the police and the investigations was very clear. No doubt about Baraka City. Everything
I understand
clear.
You have already made that clear, but I want to ask you about recent events and the murder of Samuel Paty. There have been suggestions that some of the parents who objected to what he was showing children in class contacted Baraka City, and those parents have now been implicated in encouraging, perhaps, the killer of Samuel Paty. Did they contact you?
No, never. We didn't have any contact with the killer. We didn't have any contact with terrorist people. It's fake news. So the French government tried to justify this they shut down against Baraka City on CCIF to make a sense, to create sense.
Manuel Valls, former Prime Minister of France, has said this: "We are at war. If we are at war, then we must act and we must strike." What did you take it that he meant by that?
Their confusion. You have to be clear. If he'd like to fight terrorism, he can't target the Muslim community. We say that since 6 years in France, and CCIF have the same roles. So now these people, the Muslim community, understand that they are terrorists. So also we can see around the world, and specifically in Muslim countries, that there are a problem. The problem is not only in France with the Muslim community; it's in the Muslim world. Also with Turkey, they have a serious problem.
Can I ask you a question? I took a look at Baraka City's Facebook page a short while ago, and when it came to the shutting down of the organization, this phrase was used: "This is a political execution." In the light of what happened with Samuel Paty and what happened in Nice, was that a deliberate choice of words, a good choice of words?
I think the French government like to show to far right that they can do something, and they have to show their power. They can to show that they make something, and they don't have another choice to show that they shut down some Muslim and Islamic organizations like Baraka City.
Yeah, it was the word execution that I was wondering about.
Execution, yes, exactly. It's execution. Why? Because we don't. We respected the law in France. We respected everything. So now the decision is from the political people. Okay, it's not from the courtroom. It's not. So we consider that it's execution, political execution, because we was under, as told you, we was under investigations, but the reality, the investigation started in 2014, since 2019. So if in France, if there's something against Baraka City, they closed in the past, but they didn't. They never did it. So the question why now, without reason, they decided to shut down Baraka City. With some explications. Their laws in France, if their courtroom in France, if we have something, if we support a terrorist act, and if we send bad message to Muslim community, the courtroom can, before that, the courtroom can charge us. You understand?
Thank you. Yeah, Idriss Sihamedi, we appreciate your time. Thank you very much indeed for coming on Roundtable.
Thank you very much.
Okay, let us head now into the French capital, where we welcome all three of our guests in this second segment. Yasser Louati, human rights and civil liberties advocate. We say hello to the freelance journalist. Peter Allen, who's covered terrorist attacks in France since 2015, among other things, and Nacira Guenif, anthropologist and sociologist professor at the University of Paris. Peter, I'll come to you to try and get a sort of a non-French, impartial view, if you don't mind, because you're a Brit covering events, hopefully objectively. But let me come to you, Nacira, and then you, Yasser. You're both from Muslim backgrounds. So let me ask you, Nacira, first of all, do you feel as if your religion is under attack, or just Islamic extremism?
No, I wouldn't say that it's Islamic extremism that is under attack. I would say that it's the Muslim community as a whole. It doesn't mean that the attack is about having this kind of crackdown that we have experienced in the past 5 years on all Muslims in France, but it means that there's this kind of psychological, symbolic ideological pressure on Muslims in France, especially Muslim citizens, French citizens, to display themselves as real French citizens, as distancing themselves from all kind of extremism, as making proof day after day, day in and day out about the fact that they're good Muslims, which means that they align with the Republican values, and especially with those that are at stake, so it seems, like freedom of expression, laïcité, which is the French brand of secularism, and so on.
So, Yasser, would you agree with what Nacira has said there, that it is the fact that Muslims perhaps feel that they have to stand up and say, look, I am good, I am clean, I am not associated with extremism, that is actually making people feel very uncomfortable?
I think it actually goes beyond that, because when you take a look at the violent terms being used by the government, the warlike rhetoric, separatism, which has some kind of military connotation, people trying to secede from the republic, etc., and that they start using labels that nobody has ever defined, even officially within the state. There is no definition of radicalization, for example, and that they put those labels on any person they disagree with, and that they put in the same basket as Daesh, as Gérard Collomb did a few years ago, the former Minister of Interior, a woman wearing a headscarf, a person who prays, a person who is caught fasting the month of Ramadan. They are in the same basket as those radical Muslims. So today...
But isn't that just a perception? And I understand that perception can be everything, but isn't that just a perception rather than a reality? Not all Muslims are under attack in France. It is extremism which is being targeted, and people see it in different ways.
Well, it depends. Extremism seen by who? When we have the Minister of Interior ordering the raids of 51 people and organizations, and then saying, we have nothing legally speaking on those people, we just want to send a message. When you have the cops showing up in the midst of Arabic classes in a mosque, when you have, for example, the former Minister of Interior saying, we cannot shut down mosques, but we will use the COVID-19, or we will use the fire regulation to shut down places, we see that there is definitely the beginning of a criminalization of the practice of Islam, and the message being sent to Muslims that you will only be the kind of Muslims we will tell you to be. So as Professor Guenif said earlier, it's always about, you have to show that you are within the right side, but the right side keeps moving, and the rules of the game keeps changing. So right now, Muslims are literally, many of them are knocked out. I'm talking about bright students who finish school, 25 years old, talking about leaving the country, despite not having been raided by the police. As for the activists that I know in my network, people have slept for the past 10 days next to their entrance door, expecting the cops to show up because they went and raided people and there was nothing on them. And the people
I want to bring in Peter. And Peter, you've been covering events in France for a number of years now. What do you think is going on here?
Well, essentially, clearly everything we're talking about are the recent terrorist attacks, which this spate, if you put it in those very clumsy terms, started in January 2015 with the Charlie Hebdo attacks. And since then, there's been a constant anti-Muslim narrative in the country, which isn't just related to a few, and I really do mean a few, horrendous young men who have got involved in horrendous crimes and barbaric acts, and often they're drug addicts, they have mental problems, there's all kinds of things wrong with them. And what has happened is that their actions have been conflated with Islam as a whole. Remember, just before the Charlie Hebdo attacks, there were all kinds of debates here all the time, and indeed legislation against Muslims. And those two things have been conflated to the extent that those who are preaching the anti-Muslim narrative and want to subjugate Muslims in France can immediately say, well, you're not allowed an opinion back because people are having their heads chopped off, because people are being blown up at the Bataclan.
Why is this happening? Why has this become the acceptable narrative, if it has, in France? What's to be gained from it, other than perhaps pandering, as some politicians have been suggested? It's been suggested that some politicians are doing to the excuse me, to the right wing, so that they can win their votes in future elections. Why is it being done?
Well, not just the right
Actually,
wing.
it's
The
not.
great tradition of course, as we all know, of anti-clericalism in France and the French Republic. That was the whole point of laïcité, to reduce the power of the Catholic Church over the country. A lot of often quite venal hatred. That I don't think that's an exaggeration, towards the church, and indeed church and state, as was the ancient regime was all about that. And I think that what's happened is that the Muslim, I say minority, it is a minority, but it's still 5 to 6 million Muslims in France, a very useful target for that. If you do it against other social groups, especially other religious social groups, you can get into a lot of trouble in this country. But there seems to be this idea, a bit of a punch bag. The Muslims can be a bit of a punch bag, and that has been the case because of these terrorist acts more and more.
And Nacira, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I think that we should keep in mind that Muslims were for a long time part of the French colonial empire, and that Islam was a way to tame populations that were resisting colonization. And on the other hand, one should remember that in 1905, when the laïcité law was implemented, it was not supposed, it was prevented to be implemented in the colonies, and especially in Algeria. Although Algeria was a part of the mainland, you know, it was a department of of the French nation state. Yet it was not applied there. So there is some remnants, very strong remnants of this colonial times that run all the way to today's situation in France, which means that, for example, Muslims are never considered to be equal citizens as others. They are not supposed to claim rights. They are not supposed to dissent, to disagree. They are supposed just to remain in the space that is allocated to them. And let me remind you also that this is not going back all the way to 2015. There has been attacks from Mohamed Merah in 2012. There has been suspicion on Muslims all the way back to the 1980s. And specifically when the French society realized that it was becoming this kind of immigration country, and especially an immigration that came from the former colonies, and that a lot of those immigrants were from a Muslim background, which didn't mean that they wanted to
let
practice.
me ask, if I may.
But they were defined as such.
Let me ask Yasser at this particular point. Anybody can come up with an answer to this one, but I'll direct it at Yasser. If this is what Emmanuel Macron and his government is trying to do, as you suggest, to alienate all Muslims, if Marine Le Pen and her party would also like to see the same thing, perhaps even more extreme, I don't know. Is there anybody in France capable of filling this social and political vacuum who could have some influence on the way France goes in the future? Yasser?
Well, sir, the answer actually lies in the way the so-called left in France is behaving. They are either quiet, petrified, or trying to seize the opportunity to come again into the political shed-light. Our organization offers free training to policymakers on the matters of racism, discrimination, and on the matter of Islamophobia. The returns that I had from young politicians in new political parties, we are sorry, we just don't know what to do. We still have a debate on whether we should use the term Islamophobia or not. And the kind of cowardness of the left in France is not new. First, we have to keep in mind that the French left was behind the colonial enterprise and the colonial expansion, and some of the most brutal repression in Algeria actually happened under the Guy Mollet, a left-wing politician.
So are you suggesting that there is nobody capable of stepping in and taking control of the narrative and changing it?
I think there is.
Maybe Nacira wants to speak.
Yeah, I think there is actually. Alongside with this kind of crackdown on Muslims, right now there is a crackdown also on people who are called Islamo-gauchistes. That would be leftist and kind of lenient and complacent with the Islamic radicalized ideology. And these are people from the left. These are people that are in universities, in associations, who are activists, and they are accused of being the complicit of all acts of terror that took place and terrorism that took place in France and that will take place in France. So I speak as a first-hand person who is facing this,
Yeah.
and so there
But
is
that's
reaction
the
from
academia.
institutions, and no, it's not just the academia. It's
I
also
do want
people
to
who
move
are
this on just a little bit,
no.
if you don't
So
mind.
there is
And
a space, and this space is being under attack from the French state. This
okay,
is what I
I
mean.
want to bring up something that was being said in the last 24 hours or so by Anwar Gargash, United Arab Emirates foreign minister, and he was talking about Muslims in general, and he said they have to listen carefully to what Macron said in his speech. He doesn't want to isolate Muslims in the West, and he is totally right. He does not want to isolate Muslims in the West. Peter, that isn't the narrative that is coming across at the moment, but are there those within the Muslim community that you report on who are saying to other members of their community, you must denounce extremism, we don't want to be alienated, that is the wrong path to go down?
Yes, there are many. Just this morning, there were letters all over the media from prominent Muslim figures doing just that. And just a very important point of clarification, though, I deliberately started this spate of terrorism in January 2015 for a very, very good reason. And that was because it was specifically related to the Charlie Hebdo affair, which I think is crucial. We can talk about the wider issue of Islam in the world and the huge problems that are real and indeed perceived between the West and Islam. But France has a very, very specific problem right now, which is that it feels that France is attacking Muslims in a way that other European countries aren't. And a lot of it is around the Charlie Hebdo issue. And one of the problems, again, with the letters which were in the press today denouncing Islamophobia and all the things that are going on, but also saying that Muslims must say no, obviously, to Al-Qaeda and ISIS as whatever, is people don't quite know how to deal with this Charlie Hebdo issue. Macron is making huge strides at the moment to say, yes, Charlie Hebdo is a great thing. We will publish those cartoons. You know, I speak to people in Britain all the time, and they actually think that Charlie Hebdo is being taught in schools, that it's on the curriculum, and that these cartoons are being displayed in the classroom. That's the extent.
Well, Peter, it's fascinating that you should bring that up at this point, because I was going to bring up some words of Emmanuel Macron, who has said, I will always defend in my country the freedom to speak, to write, to think, to draw. So Yasser and Nacira, as long as the president says that, what end is there in sight for any kind of rapprochement?
It all depends whether the freedom of expression extends to all members of the French society, or if you only can enjoy and be granted a freedom of expression when you align with certain views and certain values. And what is interesting is that this attacks against those so-called Islamo-gauchistes, if not Islamo-fascists, the mayor of Nice called them Islamo-fascists, is that it's in the name of freedom of expression that they are being accused of using their freedom of expression in such ways that they should be silenced. They should be under control by the institution, by the police.
Nacira, I have to go to Yasser because we're running out of time. I want you to come in at this point, Yasser.
Well, we have to keep in mind that I'm going to give you the 2010 episode of the desecration of the French flag. There was a photography contest, and the winning photography was a white man wiping his behind with the French flag. It caused a national hysteria, and there is now legislation prohibiting that from happening. If you ever mark the French flag, you can get fined 7,500 euros. Now, of course, we all have the right of freedom of expression. That's a human right. It's a natural right. But to quote, for example, Jacques Chirac, who cannot be called an Islamo-gauchist or Islamo-leftist, whatever, he said that, yes, we have human rights and the right to express ourselves, but we also have an obligation towards one another because we live all together. And what's happening today is that freedom of speech is only about the dominant ideology and insulting Muslims. What shocks me the most and for being myself prosecuted by the French state for our investigations against racism within state institutions, is that we don't teach freedom of expression by speaking about revolutionary ideas. Journalists who are today being prosecuted by the Macron government and called in by domestic intelligence, we see that it's freedom of speech for only one kind or one segment of the population. And that's why it is a farce. And on top of it, I had parents complaining, and people were saying, Yasser, stop comparing this with the French flag. They are showing obscene pictures to our kids. So not only it's about teaching kids to insult their Muslim classmates and then telling them we all live together, let's be one nation under the French flag, but on top of it, many parents disagree on the fact that they are obscene. So nobody should believe this hype of freedom of expression when it's only about insulting people who won't be able to talk back or answer those dominant narratives.
Yasser, Nacira, thank you very much indeed. My apologies, Peter. I promised you a last word before we went, but as you can see, it was impossible to stop the flow. And my thanks to you wherever you happen to be watching this edition of Roundtable. We hope to have your company next time. Until then, goodbye.